Good morning, guys. Bix Weir, RoadtoRoota.com. Very, very, very excited about a few things. On Friday night, I posted the full interview of someone that we all know and love. I sat down with Clif High for about an hour and a half to discuss everything from censorship to cryptos to what's going on in our world, how it relates to where we're going. Awesome interview. Cliff is just an awesome guy. And we also talked about the uh, destruction of earning potential on YouTube and the social media engineering. I am going to post, right, well, this is the video. This is part one of the interview where we talk about social engineering and censorship and free speech on in the social media. And I'll get onto that in just 1 second. It is true that most of the alternative media that the powers that be don't like, they, as I like to call them, don't like, are being defunded and kicked off YouTube and shadow banned, and most of our revenues have gone down 70-80%. That's a fact of life. So what do? You adapt. You change your way of doing business, and that's what we're doing at RoadtoRoota. I will continue on YouTube as long as possible. Well, I'll just stay on YouTube, and they're going to defund me, and just we're going to have to find new ways to make income. So if you are up for it, to see the whole Clif High interview, go to RoadtoRoota.com and hit subscribe today, right at the top. If you're a member, just click in the member area, and it'll take you to the private road. And it's the very first link right here. Censorship, free speech, and cryptos gives you the entire hour and a half interview with Cliff that I sat down and we discussed everything from social media, programming, to cryptos, to silver. A great interview. But the first part I am going to attach to the back of this. This is it. And again, if you want to subscribe, just hit subscribe today. And also, with your subscription, you get a Veritasium. We talk about Veritasium in the full interview, and you get a silver coin. So, and also, I'm going to start selling these Bix Weir music hats. They're distressed. There's different colors. And the music box, autographed, if you want it autographed. The music box is 70 songs. It's really cool. Check it out. 70 songs on a thumb drive, 13 videos. This is it. Boom. We will be posting more information on that. All of this is basically, it was time to change the model for RoadtoRoota, but basically because we're being defunded by the deep state, and you got to adapt. And you got to learn about different ways. When the world changes, a lot of people worried about AI. And taking jobs and things like that, you need 2 or 3 different avenues to make a living. And I suggest doing things you love. I love doing the videos and the interviews. Just the model's changing a little bit. At some point, I will put out the full interview for everybody to watch. But in the meantime, I'm going to do the part about censorship first, and then the rest of the interview will be posted on the private road. So anyway, here's my good friend and fellow road warrior, Clif High, and our interview about cryptos, censorship, you name it, we talked about it. Hope you guys enjoy it. Can't touch that one.
We may have a slight interruption here when UPS shows up. The dogs will go crazy.
That's my favorite part of the Clif High interviews.
Right. The little puppies and their antics.
Absolutely. Hey, let me give you a little introduction.
Sure, go ahead.
So, hey guys, Bix Weir, RoadtoRoota.com. You'll be real happy to see who I have on the line. Our friend, our companion, our road warrior, Clif High, is here to talk censorship and then whatever else comes up. On the RoadtoRoota, we've been not destroyed. I mean, it was just an additional income for the RoadtoRoota, which has been pretty much 60 to 70% taken away. Views have been taken away. They're actually putting some of my songs out there with monetization, but not paying me for them. And I post them on my website. I'll get embed them so that it has to go through YouTube. I'll get 20,000 views on that page, but only 5,000 views on YouTube. So
Right, right. And I've often wondered why there isn't a creators consortium that funds attorneys and accountants to insist on auditing Google and YouTube money transfers. To hell with the views and stuff other than their impact on the monetary transfer, right? Because I'm quite convinced that it's, okay, so I'm convinced that it would be very easy to scam that system from inside working for Google and redirect funds because no creator has a clue about what they are owed by this system. Same thing to a certain extent is true with Amazon, but Amazon for their associates does have an accounting process that at least is addressable, if not 100% open from our perspective. Now, I can see why Google and YouTube wouldn't want to mess with, 500,000 or however many effective creators there are, banging on their door, each wanting to audit their individual records just to see, right? But I can certainly see that those same 500,000 or however many there are could pool together their resources to fund some very savage attorneys and accountants that would have a vested interest, say a percentage of the recovered funds, in auditing the process at Google and YouTube in terms of money distribution and earned income. I agree with you, Bix. The numbers are way down. And what's even more irritating is the non-transparency as to why and what. Okay, so I track the YouTube algorithm and how it works, and I'm aware that, and also Twitter and so on. There's a few of the social media that I'm on, and so I'll track the metrics there because I'm interested in the numbers, and I have the ability to skillfully analyze what I'm looking at. And so, for instance, I know that the number of views has been edited. Now it's been edited across all of YouTube. So we can't say that it wasn't applied across all creators because it was. And basically what they were doing was taking out fake accounts as views and this kind of thing, because there's a number of places in Philippines, Southeast Asia in general, where they have big racks that are like clothing racks, only in place of shirts and this kind of thing, or phones that are all hanging up there that are being controlled by a master computer to dial in and get views. So this is how you can buy clicks and views to pump up your identity. The reason that one would want to is that there's numeric thresholds within the YouTube algorithm for recommendations and promotions that are based on the total number of views. And they've obviously got a problem because any system that's left in place long enough will be gamed by humans. This one is being gamed, so they're continuously having to edit the number of views that hit a particular video. However, it is that same process that could be very easily susceptible to corruption. And you could have them decide, oh, well, we don't like this guy, so we're going to axe his views way down. And it can be all done programmatically, so there's nobody's fingers doing the dirty work, so to speak, right?
Actually, that actually Project Veritas came out with an expose on exactly what you're talking about with, I think it was Facebook.
Yeah.
And they were programming in shadow banning, where you don't even know it's being banned. You just think, oh man, yeah, that video must not have been popular. Or
sure, I made a video that sucked.
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, it's a terrible process too, because from a creator's viewpoint, because there is no transparency and there's no feedback, if we just take YouTube, there's no feedback effectively until you get over 100,000 subscribers. At that
Right.
point, you're theoretically dialed in a little tiny bit to the organization and you get a different level of feedback out of it. But nonetheless, other than the analytics, that's all you've got. So you don't know why things are happening to you. And so you make creative decisions based on the real world in which you're living in, unaware that the environment is being manipulated by others for their own agenda, and whether or not that agenda is against you, so to speak, is sort of immaterial because you're just not aware of it. So you're going to react to these things and you're going to think, oh, well, I made a crappy video and did X, Y, Z, and it may have been a great video, but and so you don't get that positive feedback, and you're into this other aspect of censorship, which is how it alters all of our behavior all of the time, because we're making good decisions on corrupt data, on bad data. And so, go ahead.
There's the overt demonetization, banning of videos, things like that, which also modifies what I'm going to say, what I'm going to write in my comments. And I mean, that is so obvious. I mean, they don't even hide that one. I just got a video that was, it was more than demonetized. It was basically taken down. And all I was talking about was Julian Assange's arrest. They didn't want anybody to discuss that, because I was talking about, well, he obviously had a, what do they call it, a contingency plan if he got knocked off or arrested to release data in various places. And I'm talking about that, and they don't want that information out there, so they literally cut off my video. Then I did the same video with different titles and no Julian Assange in the name, and it went through.
Right. It's a damn good algorithm, guy. And so here's another aspect of that. Okay. So I noticed this within the woo-woo world. When certain live streams were going on. Okay, so I'm watching like Dark Journalist, and he's got a whole long series of live streams. I don't know how many episodes he's got into these. And just because I've watched a number of them, I'm familiar with the timing and this kind of thing within how YouTube does things. If you happen to come into a live stream at the very end, they keep that stream open for you, even though what they're doing in the back end is they're processing that video for what then goes into a normal upload because the live stream is ended. So you might come in the last 5 minutes and decide to move your cursor all the way back to the beginning, and they will allow you to watch that buffer, that whole live stream again. But if you bomb out of that window, decide you're going to just go over and re-click on it on the YouTube side within that channel, not as a live stream, but having been uploaded, you can see that there's a time gap between the end of the live stream and the availability of it within the normal YouTube parameters. That time gap is what they call processing. That processing is where they run their algorithms over everything that's said and the visuals, and they hunt for copyrights violations and this kind of thing, as well as any other aspect of it that they don't like. And I've noticed that there are creators who get to certain subjects, and all of a sudden the processing time balloons way out. It's like 3 and 4 times what is usual for that creator on that subject. And so I can apply these kind of metrics very finely, because I know the context of Dark Journalist, I know the language he's using and the subjects he's covering, usually UFOs. And I noticed that on some of his videos, the processing time would triple or quadruple between the shutoff of the live stream and the availability on YouTube. And this is independent of, to some extent, the amount of volume that YouTube is doing at their scale of stuff coming on in. In other words, it's not his extra long video that's making it lag because they're processing, his video is not the straw that broke the camel's back and slowed everybody down. We know that they're processing 500 or more actual minutes of video every elapsed minute. So Dark Journalist's extra little bit isn't going to affect that. So it's within the algorithmic processing itself that this lag time comes in. And I think that what they're doing is that they go along and they see some language that they think is suspicious, and so they kick it up to the next level of more intensive processing to see if it gets through. And there's all of these, shall we say, potentials for, and there's maybe probabilities for different kinds of interference. So some of the interference that they can have without it being, and this would have to be, I guess, shadow banning or shadow censorship, and that is they can simply take longer to monetize, or they can put you down at the bottom of the heap for potential ads, because just because you're monetized doesn't mean that an ad's going to be slotted in on your video, right? And so they may just decide that that's one of the approaches they're going to do. And here's the beauty of it from their viewpoint. If they tweak their advertising algorithm, it's not censorship on your video. Yes, they've drastically reduced your income, but they're not singling you out by putting a flag on all of your videos that says no advertising here and have the advertising bounce off. They're over here tweaking the algorithm, and it just so happens that it hits your income that way. And so, you know, at that level, they're able to stand in front of Congress and say, no, we're not censoring anybody. Business decisions. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, here's my deal. I mean, I'm a capitalist. I believe that companies should be able to do what they want, and the market will figure out whether they're worth it or not. But the problem I have is that these companies, the way they got so big was, number one, huge government investment and involvement in the very beginning. And if you go back to the beginnings of Google and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, there is, I got 4 companies, In-Q-Tel, Leidos.
Well, In-Q-Tel is the CIA.
Yeah.
That's the, yeah. So no, and also it's not just in the beginning, it's continuous.
And yeah, exactly. So my take is, no, wait a minute. This is not a private company. This is a publicly funded company with public money.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, as they were growing these companies, the rules were not there. They were very lax rules to get you involved, to build that market share, to get you money, because they want you in their system. And now once we're in their system, they had that kind of market share that you really can't leave to go somewhere else. They start cutting you off. And that's my big problem, is that it's a public square because we paid for it. And number 2, they are exercising monopoly type power to steer the public where they want them to go.
Okay, and that's quite correct, but you have to see it in a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit more insidious and evil conspiracy fashion. Okay,
I've never done that before.
yeah. Let's have a little fun here and explore that for a second, because this is strikingly, well, this is an evolution, and it is an echo of what happened with the BBS system in the 70s and 80s. Okay, for people who don't know, there were these things called BBSs. They were dial-up. They were big, giant modem farms, which was basically you'd buy 50 or 60 phone lines and connect a modem to each phone line, have those modems all go to a central server, and people could dial into your server and interact. Government didn't like this. The system was 100% private and in no way involved government subsidies. It became very profitable. There were lots and lots of these BBS farms, they were called, starting to really take off in the 80s, to where that it was impacting the telcos. The telephone companies were making money on this. They enjoyed providing services to these BBSs, but the government couldn't have it because there were thousands of these guys active and operating. Some of them had, and they had forum on them. They had fora on them, right? You'd just go there, it'd be a forum on, radio controlled airlines. Initially, though, it was UFOs. And that's what really freaked the government out, was most of these early BBSs were all devoted to woo-woo subjects. And then they had pornography start showing up, and then some other subject matters. And it was basically the internet building out before there was a network backbone. And so if I wanted to, as a user of these services, if I wanted to talk about UFOs, I would dial into one BBS and I'd interact there. And then maybe later on in the night, I would dial over to another BBS and so on. At that point, CompuServe, AOL, and a couple of other companies decided to centralize, and they were our first social media, because CompuServe centralized a bunch of those BBS subject matters into a single dial-up, so you could stay on the platform and not have to dial out and maybe not be able to connect because you got on a hot forum and those modems were always constantly, a lot of people trying to interact and so on. The more popular it became, the harder it became to get into some of these BBSs, simply because of its own popularity. And the owners of them would have to run on out and buy modems. They would have to take business loans, and it became a whole big deal. And in fact, it started being written up. And again, the government hated it because it was just a madhouse to try and monitor what was going on. They had no recourse on how the BBS owners operated. If a BBS guy decided that the government was sniffing too much on his machines, he could shut them down, wipe them all out, start up the next day under new sets of phone numbers, and they would have no way of knowing until months later they found out about it, and government was years behind the curve anyway. So it was at the highest level. Intel Q, owned by the CIA, funded by the CIA, 100% gives money to private companies to further technology that they want to grow. And so they funded Twitter, they funded Facebook, they funded Google and YouTube, and they basically tried to create areas where we would naturally want to collect and corral ourselves, just so they didn't have to run around trying to police a million different BBSs, right? And so that's kind of where we're at the moment relative to what's going on. Now, the problems that we're getting into are going to be really complex because it's a continual battle. So the breakout of the BBSs created a situation in which every man's voice became very much more powerful, because there were people that would listen and read what you were writing in ways that only became true with the electronic publication, even at the BBS level. So in other words, freedom of the press was always a lie. There was only freedom of the press if you owned one. Right? If you didn't own a press, you had no freedom of press. There were gatekeepers all the way along, and government loved that. Once BBSs came through, once computers came through, they had to do something, because all of a sudden it was electronic publishing, even at that crude level, that got them all kinds of audiences. They knew that they wouldn't be able to control this. Politics was getting out of hand. And so then the internet comes in, and then it takes a number of years for us to build up to this point where we're at now. And now we're in kind of a weird battle relative to the situation with concentration and censorship. Okay, and you're talking about you're censoring yourself, and that's how it's impacted me. So I had some code that I'd written in the maybe started on it maybe 99 and worked on it through like 2005 or something. And this code analyzed emotional tension in two different ranges: building tension and release of tension within words. And it would chart this stuff, and it produced some very interesting charts. And I used it for a number of years, and then things started changing, and it was too hard to maintain. The computer operating systems started changing. Some of the libraries I was using fell out of favor, and I couldn't get them to work on new versions of Windows, and I just dropped it essentially anyway, because it didn't add economic value to what I was doing. However, I recreated that software and rewrote it here recently in Python, and was shocked to run and I recreated, even though it was a 20 plus year old C code, and I hadn't even commented it. I was quite able to figure it all out. It had my original lambda calculus functions, one-liners we used to call them, unpacked them, put them in Python code, validated it all, went through all kinds of debugging, ran it against old data set metrics, and it behaved as that old program did. It recreated the chart relative to pixel placement 100%. And so I knew that I was good with the code. And then I ran it against live data and was quite shocked.
Your current data?
Exactly. I ran it against live web scraping data, correct. Current data that's just been extracting now. Because of what Python does, I could eliminate thousands of lines of C code and thousands of lines of Perl processing code and put it in Python in like 145 lines, because there are these libraries that you can get that allow you to do all different kinds of natural language processing comparison with 1 or 2 lines of code, as opposed to the hundreds of lines that I had to actually do in the past. So I was able to recreate it, and I built in a web scraper function for a test suite and glued the old charting program to that web scraper function, or web scraper program. So it's gathering data in real time and then provides charts occasionally. And so I ran this, and as I say, I was somewhat shocked because what I was getting out of it, and that's why I went back and ran this software against old metrics and had it use the old data sets and see if it could recreate the charts, which it did, because the charts it's creating now would be basically useless to me. And the reason that they're useless to me has nothing to do with the charting or the web scraping or the language processing. It has to do with the nature of the language itself that's being expressed. And so I find that basically what I've run into is that on the places that I used to count on very free-flowing, emotionally active text continuously, like Twitter, which I love Twitter because you can get the feed in real time, and there's hundreds of, potentially over 100 million people in there doing stuff all the time. So you get a lot of words out of it. And it's like flat. Well, it's not flat. In fact, it's the reverse of flat. It would be better for me if it had flattened out. So let me explain. Basically, my old program took a huge amount of data, and it found out where, and if we looked at that data from emotions, it would be on sort of a bell curve. And what the processing did was to take the middle chunk that's around the mean there, right? Half of them above and half of them below. And it would take the middle chunk of data, and we would use that middle chunk as our stop, so to speak, or our indicator. And if it moved a little bit this way, then, and there were prescient words this way, then we know that the emotional value would be towards over here. If that middle chunk moved over this way a little bit and towards these emotions, then we know that this would be happening, building or release of tension, fundamentally. And so the charting program looks at that middle bulge of data, takes it as an aggregate, uses it as a pointer towards building tension or release of tension, and it assigns a numeric value. This produced a chart that was very much, well, you've seen them in the past, extremely sawtooth, because it's reacting and projecting on a minute-by-minute sort of a basis. Now I don't get that, because there's no longer this middle bulge, right? Instead, what I see is the tendency of language to concentrate in this weird sort of a camel's two-humped camel kind of a thing in terms of what it looks like. There's extremes of language, but the extremes are way dampened down. And language itself has built itself into these two humps that are about half the size of the overall bulge as it should be. And so what's happening, and I know this to be the case, is that people on Twitter are self-censoring. People on Facebook get a lot of data off of Facebook, get a lot of data off the comments on YouTube, and they're very much self-censoring because they're afraid of being kicked off. So that has flattened the emotional range that I used to work on and added no value to that flattening process, right? So I used to work off of the nuance of that middle amount, shifting ever so slightly to the right or left around specific words within my charting. And one was building tension and one was release of tension. Now it's nothing but these big peaks and no middle bulge in there to be able to shift from. And in fact, where that bulge used to be, as I say, there's these like two humps with a trough in between. And there's all the lack of prescient words because people are self-censoring. So it's my theory that what's going on is that because they have to actively think as a result of fear, so bear in mind, they are afraid when they're writing Twitter responses now that they're going to be shit-canned and thrown off. They're afraid when they make videos of saying the wrong things And so they are approaching this with a certain specific emotional parameter around all of their actions that we should not lose sight of, because that fear is tainting all of the language. And it's also at the same time causing them to remove deliberately specific word groups from their language. That's why there's all these holes within my data sets now. So I'm fundamentally out of business. And here's the interesting part of this activity on the part of the government through their control of centralized media, social media conglomerates, is actually going to get into a negative feedback loop with themselves. And I see it now already in some areas. We'll see it become more and more violent as they start feeding further and further on their own language, because there's so many bots. The bots are out there analyzing language right now, and those bots are going to analyze language relative to the stock market, and they're going to make predictions for The Economist, for all of these, Wall Street Journal, all of these kind of things. There are analysts that are using bots that are language sensitive. Well, that language is flattened out and become fractured, so they're going to be affected.
Hey, Cliff.
Yeah.
My screen is frozen, but the recording's going fine. You're fine on this side.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know you're looking really stern at me.